I'd like to offer a sutta as a springboard for this session called Theranāmaka Sutta, a Mendicant Named Senior, which is from Saṁyutta Nikāya, chapter 21, sutta number 10. I'd like to begin by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammāṃ Saṅghāṃ Namasāmi. This sutta is a sutta really about solitude, about Viveka, and how we practice this quality, seclusion. So if you'd like to relax and just listen, I'm going to be reading from the sutta, a Mendicant Named Senior. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Rajagaha, in the bamboo grove, the squirrels feeding ground. At that time, there was a certain mendicant named Senior. He lived alone, and he praised living alone. He entered the village for alms alone. He returned alone. He sat in private alone. And he concentrated on walking mindfully alone. Then several mendicants went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Sir, there's a certain mendicant named Senior who lives alone and praises living alone." So the Buddha addressed one of the monks, "Please, in my name, tell the mendicant Senior that the teacher summons him." "Yes, Reverend," that monk replied. He went to the Buddha, bowed, and sat down to one side. So the Buddha has called Senior to discuss his practice with him. The Buddha says, "Is it really true, Senior, that you live alone and praise living alone?" "Yes, sir." "But in what way do you live alone and praise living alone?" And Senior answers, "Well, sir, I enter the village for alms alone. I return alone. I sit in private alone. And I walk mindfully alone. That is how I live alone and practice living alone." And the Buddha replies, "This is a kind of living alone. I don't deny it. But as to how living alone is fulfilled in detail, listen and apply your mind. I will speak." And how is living alone fulfilled in detail? It's when what is in the past is given up, what is in the future is relinquished, and desire and greed for present incarnations is eliminated. That's how living alone is fulfilled in detail. That is what the Buddha said. And then the Holy One, the teacher, went on to say, "The champion, all-knower, so very intelligent, is unsullied in the midst of things. He's given up all, freed in the ending of craving. I declare that person to be one who lives alone." A1. So this is a really beautiful, clear, short, concise teaching for us, really teasing out the meaning of Viveka, of solitude. In the later teachings, commentaries that followed long after the Buddha's parinibbana, we've been given the concept of three kinds of Viveka, three kinds of solitude. Kaya Viveka, physical solitude, which is really what Senior, the monk Senior, was practicing impeccably, keeping himself separate, keeping himself secluded from others. And then there's Cittaviveka, which is really what the Buddha's pointing to here. It's a higher more profound, more attained way of being secluded, which is to be secluded from our own crazy minds, friends. To be secluded from the tendency to dwell in the past, to be secluded from the tendency to project forwards into the future, and in the present, to be willing to let go of the tendency to proliferate, to create, to embellish what's actually real, what's actually the truth of this moment. Cittaviveka, this ability to be present, and this seclusion is a true seclusion that doesn't require even the physical seclusion from others, from noise, from the hustle and bustle of life, from the conditions around us. There's no need with Cittaviveka to try to control the world around us, to make it quiet, to make it possible for us to practice, to have silence and peace for conditions. This is not necessary if we practice Cittaviveka, the seclusion of a mind that's awake to what's true, the Dhamma of this moment. There's a beautiful sutta in Majjhima Nikāya where the Buddha talks about one single excellent attachment. Many of you will be familiar with this sutta, Bhaddekaratta Sutta. There are actually 4 suttas on this topic. And in each sutta, there's a beautiful verse that the Buddha gives, which is repeated in each of the 4 suttas. And again, it's a teaching encouraging us to hold on to just one thing and let everything else go. Hold on to the present moment, this experience, here and now. Again, in this sutta, Bhaddekaratta Suttas, the Buddha says, don't run into the future and don't hold on to the past. The past is over and the future is yet to come, is not in our hands, essentially, is not knowable. But all that we can do is to be here now and to really make the most of this present moment, to behave skillfully according to the conditions of this present moment, and to allow the mind to be present, to be experiencing fully this present moment without distraction, without proliferation. So this quality of Cittaviveka is a more true form of seclusion, and it's more doable because we can cultivate and develop the quality of Cittaviveka wherever we are, whether we're physically secluded or not. So Kaya Viveka, physical seclusion, very important. I'll say a bit more about that in a while. Cittaviveka, the seclusion of the skillful mind that's practicing well, dwelling in the present, the here and now. And there's a third form of Viveka, of seclusion, that's talked about in the commentaries, which is Upadhi Viveka, which is the seclusion of a mind that is no longer affected, bombarded, buffeted by the taints, by the defilements, by desire, by aversion, by confusion or delusion or ignorance. So this is the true solitude of a realized person, somebody who's free from suffering, who's attained the final goal of our practice. And so this is something to aim for. And in aiming for Upadhi Viveka, the freedom from any kind of distraction, delusion, suffering, we, in working towards this ultimate form of seclusion, we want to practice Cittaviveka. Coming back to Kaya Viveka, coming back to the seclusion of the form of the body, for sure, the Buddha really did recommend that we try to seek out seclusion when it's appropriate, when it's possible, when the conditions allow, when it's the most compassionate approach. And for sure, when we're meditating, it's very helpful to seek out quiet places, isn't it? I mean, the Buddha, in his lifetime, when he was the Bodhisattva, before he became the Buddha, he practiced seclusion to an extreme degree. He practiced many things to an extreme degree. He fasted to an extreme degree. He even cut off his breathing, fasted on the breath to an extreme degree until he was really suffering very much. He became very emaciated, very physically unhealthy because of his extreme ascetic practices. And in relation to seclusion, he would plunge into the forest, find the most remote places to practice, caves also. And he said when he was a bodhisattva, if he saw somebody coming while he was practicing in seclusion, he would run away. He'd hide in order not to connect with and meet anybody else. Such was the degree of seclusion that the bodhisattva practiced. And as we can really glean from the Buddha's teachings, when he became the Buddha, when he became fully enlightened, his ascetic practices had dropped away as part of his process of realizing the goal of our practice. He moderated the degree to which eating was significantly a renunciant practice, but not an ascetic practice to the degree where we have to go hungry or we have to be emaciated, we have to be malnourished. Moderation in eating, moderation in sleeping, the middle way. And so also with solitude. The Buddha recommended when we practice meditation, good, to find a place where there's quietude, where there's not a lot going on, away from the madding crowd. Find a quiet room. In the time of the Buddha, he recommended go out and seek a wide open space or a heap of straw somewhere, a cave, a mountain, a ravine, the root of a tree. Go into the forest. So yes, we can really take this teaching to heart and feel fine about seeking out quiet places for practice when it's practical, when it's achievable without causing any harm or suffering to anyone else. The Buddha also, interestingly, didn't always recommend seclusion to the monastics, to his disciples. There's a sutta in Majjhima Nikāya, Bhaddekaratta Sutta. There's a monk called Bhaddali who was seeking out solitude, just like this monk senior here in this teaching. Bhaddali was wanting to go off to the forest and to practice on his own. And the Buddha actually said to him, this is not the right time for you. You're not ready for this. And there's another sutta in Majjhima Nikāya, the Fear and Dread Sutta, where again the Buddha is discussing with one of the lay disciples how going off to very remote places is fine, but it's not suitable for everybody. There's a gradual training here, which the Buddha has described in many teachings. So solitude and the practice of getting away from everybody and practicing alone for significant periods of time is really part of the path of practice when it's suitable, when it's possible, but it's not the first thing that we would want to be doing. So in the case of Bhaddali, for instance, he was encouraged by the Buddha to continue practicing in the Sangha, in community, because that's what he needed in order to start his training, to begin to develop on the path. So I'm sure you're all very aware of the gradual training that the Buddha laid down for us, beginning with Sila, of course, the foundation. Let's not worry too much about going on long silent retreats or going off to very remote places to practice. If we haven't developed the Sila, the virtue, if we're not able to keep the 5 precepts, That's way more important until we've developed our practice to the extent that our speech, our behavior, and even our ways of thinking are consciously inclining towards the good and disinclining towards any kind of harm whatsoever. So this is the first and most important foundational practice for us, is to practice the precepts, keep the precepts in mind, and avoid any kind of harm. And then we're practicing virtue. We can begin to develop a degree of mindfulness. We can begin to practice a degree of renunciation to actually limit the amount of input. And this relates to solitude, because if we're surrounded all the time by the worldly news, the media, the movies, the music, the art, and so forth, not disparaging any of it, but it's more like, do we need to maybe reduce the amount of information, mental conditioning that we're taking in from outside? Do we need to practice solitude in this way? We don't have to take ourselves away from the world, but we can be very careful about how much we connect with the endless amount of information that we can take in, and take care. So a degree of renunciation is the next aspect of the gradual training, to just moderate how much we're receiving and come home and pay attention to what's actually happening here in this mind and body. Another aspect of the gradual training is to moderate eating, moderate sleeping. So to get the right balance so that our bodies are energized, we're healthy, we're well rested, but not oversleeping. So these kinds of practices, actually, we benefit a lot from being around others in the development of these practices. First, we want to get these practices down, and then we can think about the long silent retreat, going into the kuti in the forest, and so forth. Like everything, seclusion is most definitely praised by the wise. It's recommended by the Buddha, but it's also in a context of training whereby we can recognize whether or not we're ready to step into a more solitary practice. And this again is speaking about Kaya Viveka. This is speaking about the physical seclusion. Now, monks and nuns, of course, we incline towards Kaya Viveka. We love our solitude. We love to be alone. It's really the common denominator for monastics that we cherish. We love solitude. I don't know any monastics who stayed in robes for more than a few years who don't actually have this tendency, this inclination. In and of itself, it's not a liberating quality, but it is very helpful if we have the inclination to spend time alone in seclusion, because then we're going to be developing mindfulness more easily. We have more time to meditate. We have more time to take in the Buddha's teachings in quiet surroundings. So it's very natural for monastics to develop and cultivate Viveka, Kaya Viveka. And then coming back to what I was saying earlier, this practice, to whatever degree we feel ready for this practice of having quiet time, alone time, the purpose of this practice is to enable us to progress on the path, to develop mindfulness, to develop samadhi, peacefulness, the still mind. And this is the development of Cittaviveka, of a mind that is at peace, that is, I was going to say insulated from the world, but it's not really like that, is it? It's not that we're separating out. It's not that we become indifferent to the world around us, but we have more like ability to very spaciously relate to the world around us. So we're not caught up, we're not bombarded or overwhelmed by the conditions around us, but rather we can observe them from a mindful perspective and with equanimity, because with mindfulness, this enlightenment factor of equanimity begins to manifest for us. So to not be identifying with experience, but to be able to observe calmly, spaciously. This Cittaviveka, this solitude of the heart, of the mind, is inevitable in our practice. We're going to develop this, and it is a way in which peace can come into the world. If we're developing Cittaviveka, the solitary heart, the solitary mind, that is peacefully and calmly practicing at all times, in all conditions, then we're less likely to be burning with the world that is burning all around us, friends. Burning with what? With the fires of greed, the fires of hatred, the fires of delusion, confusion. And it truly is the case that as we really develop Cittaviveka, develop in our practice, develop in insight, we can look around and we can see this burning, these fires that are burning in the world. And as we develop this quality of solitude, a solitary heart, a heart that is really only immersed in one thing, and that is in the reality of this moment, in the Dhamma, and therefore in liberation from all suffering. If we're really immersed in this, then we are not going to be taking sides. We're not going to be fired up by what we see and hear and experience. We're going to be always bringing in cool, calm, abiding quality of peace, peacefulness, compassion. And this is so needed, right? So important for us as practitioners, as people who love virtue, as people who love freedom, who want to be living in a way that's free from suffering, free from all the unwholesome qualities, to be able to offer this into the mix, into the field. How valuable, how precious, and to keep practicing whatever the worldly winds are, however they're blowing, however they're buffeting us. So the Buddha spoke a great deal about the solitude that we develop through our practice. So his preliminary instructions to allow ourselves some solitude from the sense realm, consider restraining the senses so we're not taking in so much from outside. Preliminary instruction to be able to come into this mind and body and start paying attention and unraveling, untying the knots, seeing the defilements here and seeing how they arise and pass away. And wisdom follows in the wake of this process of insight. This is a preliminary instruction for us. And also the preliminary instruction, Kaya Viveka, take yourself into quiet places whenever you can to practice meditation. Sit in quiet places and be alone, or be with others who are also practicing in this way. This is a preliminary instruction. But then this leads us to this form of solitude, which is Cittaviveka, which is where we're continuously, as much as possible, rooting out the defilements, not allowing ourselves to be surrounded by the past or the future, or even proliferating around the present moment. So this is the peace and solitude of the mind that is free, freeing up. My teacher, Luang Por Ganha in Thailand, he speaks about having a heart that is an AC heart. Of course, Thailand is pretty much always hot, and sometimes it's very hot, sometimes it's just hot, sometimes it's very, very hot. And so this simile, this way of describing his experience is really relevant for people there and meaningful, to speak about having an AC heart, a cool heart, a heart surrounded by coolness. And we can do this through our practices, not just practicing solitude, of course, but practicing meditation, practicing moderation, practicing sense restraint, and practicing virtue. We can, through these practices, begin to develop the coolness of heart. And it doesn't mean we always feel cool. It doesn't mean our heart is always peaceful. We can get really reactive. We can lose our equanimity. But it's okay when we're practicing, because we can see when we're heating up, we're burning, we're getting involved, we're identifying with experience, we're losing that spacious ability to see the bigger picture. We can notice when that's happening. And through the noticing of that, we're emerging from these taints, from these defilements that cloud and obscure our natural peaceful states. We can be developing ever more degrees of solitude. This is one way of putting it. This is one lens. As the Buddha said to Senior, the monk, in this sutta, it's okay to, if you can, and as a monk one often can, if you can live alone, not speak to anyone, not see anyone, keep a very quiet background presence, be very unobtrusive, very quiet, practicing. One can do this. And if it's not possible to do this, that's okay. We can still practice with whatever the conditions are. But it's okay to practice in solitude if that's possible for us. And yet, the Buddha said to Senior, I need to tell you more about this quality of solitude. To really practice solitude, seclusion, we want to seclude our minds from the past, seclude them from the future, and seclude them from any embellishment of the present moment. So this is a really profound teaching, friends, and something we can all put into practice. We can notice, can't we, when we incline towards the past, and when we're operating in the present through the clouding, the ignorance, the confusion of past experience. So when the past is not fully understood and put aside, we can have patterns of behavior that are painful, that are imbued with desire or aversion or confusion, because we're dwelling in the past. When we remember things from the past, we can have reactions to those memories. We can notice when our present moment is tainted by the past, by unfinished business. And that's fine, because then we can see and experience fully any kind of obscuration or knot or blockage from the past that's obscuring our clear seeing of the present. We can experience that through our practice and see how these patterns can begin to dissolve. And we can be truly here and responsive, skillfully responsive to what's happening here and now. And equally, we can see when our minds move into the future, speculating, maybe worrying about the future, producing a future, creating a future. Nothing wrong with that, but it's actually all illusion, all delusion, because we can't really know what's coming. It's impossible to know. And to put ourselves in that future is to miss the moment, to be asleep to the present moment, to be, the Buddha said, like a dead person. We're not alive. to the moment. We're not here when we're careening off to the future, creating and proliferating around it. So we don't want to do that. When we notice then that the mind is going into the future, we can just bring it back. And so helpfully bring it back to the body, bring it back to the breath, which is always here and always now. So let's notice, friends, these ways in which we become entangled. We can be far, far from the madding crowd, here and now, when we're practicing well, staying present, not getting caught up in the past or the future, not proliferating around the present experience, when we're right here, mindful, energized, peaceful, present, wisdom can arise. And this is the true solitude that's possible for all of us. And then we're working towards Cittaviveka, the freedom from all the obscurations, freedom from desire, aversion, delusion. We're most surely moving in this direction. And to get to the point where we are dwelling in Cittaviveka, the solitude that's free from any kind of suffering whatsoever, we can be anywhere, in any kind of situation, in the midst of the crowd, and still, as Luangpo Ganha describes it, there's the AC of the heart, there's the coolness, the peacefulness, this contribution, this offering for ourselves and also for the whole. How valuable, how precious. May we all, through our practice of Cittaviveka, peaceful heart, mindful heart, witnessing experience but not getting caught up in experience, may we all incline evermore towards Cittaviveka and be a beacon of peace and calm and wisdom in this world. Awam.